Hello everyone and welcome in to another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy Thursday afternoon to you all. And today we shall have a great show, starting off with the relatively breaking news that unfortunately talented second-year player Victor Wembanyama will be out for the rest of the season due to blood clots in his right shoulder. We'll be continuously monitoring this situation potentially throughout the entirety of this year as NBA fans. But then as well, also talking about Matthew Stafford and his potential destinations as his future with the Los Angeles Rams becomes ever more tenuous. Then we'll also be looking at Kevin Durant's situation, where he could end up, how this summer is really going to affect the future of the Phoenix Suns and Kevin Durant himself. Also, going to be looking at what's next for the Los Angeles Lakers after their bizarre trade deadline. We talked about it a little bit, previewing that bizarre game against the Charlotte Hornets, which they actually lost coming back from the All-Star break. But now that we're in the stretch run for the Lakers, what could their season look like? And what could their off-season as well look like, as Luka and LeBron are set for massive extensions? And then last but not least, we're transitioning to the MLB, talking about the Dodgers yet again. It's always seemingly going to be something about the Dodgers when we talk about the MLB, just because they are, on paper, the MLB's most talented and perhaps best team. But the big question for them this year will be, can they go back-to-back? Not since the 98 to 2000 Yankees have we had a team repeat as World Series champions. But before we get into any of those exciting topics, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network. Keeping up to date with our shows is always something that we try and get into here at the network. As always, a lot of good ones around, so not just my show, but other shows as well. Appreciate your support. But if you want to support us through our live stream or more directly through interacting with us through the live stream, the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features are the way to go, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net. As always, great way to contribute and interact with our shows a little bit more directly, and we genuinely appreciate it, and it just makes them that much better when you, our faithful audience, are contributing to them. Without further ado, let's just jump right into it, starting off with the relatively breaking news that came out just a couple of hours ago about Victor Wembanyama being shut down for the season by San Antonio due to deep vein thrombosis, otherwise known as a blood clot in the right shoulder, discovered immediately after he returned from the All-Star game in California to San Antonio. Now, this news is really damaging to the prospect of the Spurs, at least this season, because right now they're currently 12th in the West at 23-29. 3.5 games out of a play-in spot, and this news kind of derails their short-term future, at least for this season. But if you think about the goings-on of this Spurs team this season, already with Greg Popovich dealing with a stroke himself, and now a generational talent who's just 21 years old getting a very, very, very serious injury this early in his career, I feel like now the tenor of the Spurs as an up-and-coming franchise is starting to go off the rails. And I feel that the Spurs really are a team that's going to be proactive in monitoring Wemby and his recovery, but this does set them back a little bit. There is silver linings, not to the injury, but to the future, especially the long-term future of the Spurs. But right now, you have to be concerned about the one player that you really can't help but feel sorry for in terms of the Spurs rebuild, because he is the generational talent meant to springboard this franchise. And so that's why, at least the injury, in theory, is devastating to the short-term future of the Spurs. Because we talk about Wembanyama and talk about the season he's had, leading the league in blocks, taking over 400 three-pointers, blocking over 170 shots. No player in NBA history at this point in the season has had a season quite like it. And as well as all the accolades he received this season, the first-time All-Star and last season with him winning the Rookie of the Year. I feel like this was a point in his career where we were just getting the quote-unquote amuse-bouche to what Wembanyama was going to become. He's already a generational talent, but this seemed to be the year where any notion of, questions arising around his talent were dispelled. And in many ways, in that first half of the season, they were. And while the Spurs weren't necessarily performing up to the par and the standard that was set for them with the acquisition of Chris Paul, perhaps, they still were in the play-in conversation. And right now, because of his generational first half of the season, they are in a position to compete for a play-in. But this injury specifically comes at a devastating time for them, at least this season, because in many ways, the second year of Wembanyama's career will probably be the most pivotal for good and bad. Let's say this injury never happened, or in many ways potentially never discovered. Had Wembanyama played out the season, there definitely would have been a great chance of this Spurs team making the play-in, or at least competing for it, and thus giving hope and optimism to this rebuild. But now you're basically looking at a timeline where Wembanyama hopefully recovers in time for the start of next season, but you don't necessarily know how far along you'll be, because without him, you don't necessarily know what needs to be built around him. And that kind of segues into how they're probably going to view this year's draft, because now they're probably going to plummet to the point where they'll be in the running for a lottery selection. And everyone's saying that this draft is very deep. And the Spurs are a team that's certainly well equipped, not just for this draft, but for future drafts as well. This year, they have their own pick, and Atlanta's pick this season was not protected. But I feel like the reason why they can't take advantage of the draft in the short term is because of this injury. But the silver lining about the draft in general for the Spurs is that they have, over the next 7 years, the most draft picks of anyone in the NBA. So it's not like the Spurs will not have chances to bolster this roster over the next coming years of Wembanyama's career. But looking at the severity of this injury is very important, especially for someone this young, because blood clots potentially end careers, and a little bit earlier than expected at that, especially in the NBA. A lot of players have to retire due to blood clots because some blood clot situations could potentially be life-threatening, especially in the shoulder. And so that's how the San Antonio Spurs are going to have to view this injury. They can't immediately hope and pray that Wembanyama is going to come back fully recovered and be the savior of this franchise. Now this becomes a whole different ballgame. You can't throw him out into the fire with draft picks he hasn't had the chance to coalesce with and mature with and expect him to be the bell cow. Now, in a situation where you most certainly are going to have a lottery pick, if you're the Spurs, you can't pick with Wembanyama fully in mind anymore. You have to start thinking about the ramifications of this injury and how you yourselves are going to have to monitor Victor Wembanyama. Because right now, you could care less about who you pick up in the next 7 drafts. It's all about how they combine with this generational talent and most importantly, how this generational talent will outplay post-injury. And while I would like to have a little bit more optimism surrounding this injury, especially considering the fact that the Spurs have so much draft capital, I feel like I really can't, because in the long run, when you try to build around a player like Wembanyama, you're going to have to say that he's someone who's a little bit more fragile than we expect. And that might throw certain players off if you're looking to add through trade or in the draft as well. Because now, playing with Victor Wembanyama gets a little different too because of this injury. Now, certain players are going to be like, yes, he's a generational talent, and I still believe that he will perform well post-injury. But this is a very scary injury. And so, if we can't guarantee that we're going to play with a healthy Victor Wembanyama for the rest of his career, why would we come this franchise? And so, with that, the whole perception of the Spurs as this team that's going to be up and coming in the NBA for the next 5 to 10 years gets completely altered just because of this singular injury. And who knows, maybe this injury may not even turn out to be as severe as once thought. Maybe they nip this in the bud, they monitor him, and his road to recovery is faster than we expected, and he comes back better than ever. But now, because of this significant injury, because we seemingly know very little about it, how does this change the narrative of the Spurs franchise? How does this completely alter the plans in the long term for the Spurs franchise especially? And I hope to God that Victor Wembanyama comes back healthy, and I hope he does have a prolific career. But now, the future of the players around him becomes a little bit more uncertain, in my opinion. But let me know what you think about this breaking news, because coming up next, we're going to transition over for just a little bit to the NFL, talking about Matthew Stafford and how his career as a Los Angeles Ram could be coming to an end and the potential destinations he could end up in. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.